Nate Lawrence,
Homer
thanks.
Helios.
Thanks for doing this, bro.
I appreciate you for having me. Thank you.
Definitely. Yeah, man. So I know you're in the sphere of bioenergetics, and I definitely am very intrigued by what we've been talking about, like personally for the last few weeks, just getting to know you. And before we kind of expand on that or any of the intricacies there, why don't you just give us like a quick, I guess, broad overview of not only yourself but what bioenergetics is like as a whole.
Yeah. I think to me the whole idea really started to become illuminated by Ray talking about this idea that this is main thesis that energy and structure are interdependent at every level. And for me, dealing with my health, that was kind of how I got brought to Ray originally. I just had symptoms of hypothyroidism, essentially just like hair shedding, facial puffiness, digestive issues, and that was really how I first got introduced to everything. And I found Danny Roddy from there. And Danny Roddy talked a lot about Ray's work. He made videos with him and stuff like that. And I started to see how metabolism, the essentially production of energy, is the complete regulator of our entire existence. And Ray focused on how that involves your thyroid function and carbon dioxide and ATP, since thyroid helps to convert the different either glucose or the different fuel substrates into energy. So essentially, I think you can see it as the flow of electrons from either food, from the environment, from sun, and really there's multiple stages of energy conversion, and there's different parts of the conversions that can be blocked by things like polyunsaturated fats, like seed oils, of course. It's a big one that everyone knows about.
Yep.
Endocrine disruptors, xenoestrogens. And I started kind of putting that together with my issues with digestion and understanding that really the flow of energy is the entire focus. I think all of the downstream concerns of focusing on like a specific structural issue or I think that the standard medical perspective would be that you have random mutations in your genes that are passed down to you, and this is what causes some degenerative state. But really, the bioenergetic view says the energy flowing through your system is what controls how the genes are expressed that you inherit from your family. So it's, I think, a huge picture to kind of unravel. But just I think for me, it was understanding really glucose is the easiest form of metabolized energy. So that would be from fruit, honey, cane sugar. And if we look at that in the cell, glucose goes from the glycolysis, which is one of the first stages of energy production, and it turns into pyruvate, then it goes through the Krebs cycle, and then to the electron transport chain where it generates all of the 36 ATP and carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide was what Ray focused on in differentiating between like stress metabolism or the cancer metabolism and oxidative metabolism, which would be the oxidation of glucose. So what is almost universal in a state of stress is that you're not fully converting glucose into the 36 ATP and CO2. So you're seeing a buildup of lactic acid and impaired ATP production since you're not able to derive all the energy that you're getting from food. So it's I don't know if I'm going too crazy in depth.
Yeah.
But
just to like to back up and like reverse engineer that a bit. Like, so when you say that energy and structure are interdependent, so you're saying energy is something that we obviously can't see, right? Like this flow of energy, this flow of life, this momentum that moves life forward and drives it forward, right? And then when you say structure, you're referring to the actual like physical body and how to like interface with health and the world.
Totally, yeah. Like I see like a good example could just be the development of like a plant. Like we see a plant growing, receiving sunlight. The roots are growing through as it's receiving sunlight, and that's building structure to then help the plant grow.
And that touches on like why I am so intrigued in this philosophy is because it kind of meshes like energy and structure, right? Like health and spirit and life and all these different things that nobody really ties together like the bioenergetic space does, and Ray Peat did, and all these people, including you. So I guess like with that in mind, like what would you define because obviously plants are living in accordance with nature without like the thought and all the obstacles that we as people we encounter on our daily life. So what is it that is hindering us from that? I know it's the PUFAs and all these environmental factors, but basically what you're saying is that at the basal form of life is basically like a plant where we effortlessly bloom, where we effortlessly channel our intuition, right?
Totally.
I've heard you speak about that. And I guess like the raw form of health is intuition manifested at its
Totally.
highest form, right? So I feel from what you said, like the main thing is the thyroid. The thyroid is this basis of energy and flow. So kind of give us a breakdown, like what is just the thyroid, and then we'll get into the 36 ATP,
Yeah.
the glycolysis and all that.
Yeah, well, so the thyroid is essentially what you can see as the regulator of your metabolism, which a lot of people see as just the food that you consume, or how much food you can consume or how many calories you burn. But the bioenergetic view says that metabolism is really just your systemic energy production, and that can go all the way from your ability to digest food, your ability for muscles to contract and relax, your ability to perceive things, your senses, your ability to interact with the world and take action from what you're thinking.
Using your nutrition and that backbone of health to actually like interface with the real world and create a life that you want to live, right?
Totally,
Which
and
is, like,
that's
the vitality
exactly
aspect.
yeah. And like I really do see that cosmic flow of energy is essentially the ideas that we have, the projects that we're working towards, the things that are in our spirit. To me, is the focus is intuition. That's being actualized through metabolism. That is a process of metabolism, and I think that art and philosophy or working on any sort of project, it's you're turning that potential energy into real living matter. So that's just something that's been really fascinating to me, because I think so much of it starts at the physical level.
Yeah, and what's interesting there is like you're saying art and philosophy, which are things that come like naturally from the human spirit before like a 9 to 5 or like finances, bills, family, like just the structures of society that are imposed on us at birth, right? So like how would somebody, I know it's perceive, think, act, right? That's a Peat quote, right? Yeah. So if somebody is stuck in the perception or the thought, like what can they do immediately to kind of distance themselves from that dissonance?
Yeah, I think like it's always a tough thing, because it's to me about really just leaning into awareness, and I think like it gets very easy to turn away from your perception. I think that's always the biggest one that I notice. And Ray focused on serotonin, I think, for this reason. So serotonin is typically called the happy hormone, in the mainstream view, but the bioenergetic view would call it the hibernation hormone. Really, the thing that I found fascinating was that animals, before winter, they'll eat lots of nuts and seeds to stock up for the winter. And they're rich in polyunsaturated fats, and they also irritate digestion, because seeds are kind of difficult to digest.
Yeah.
And what that does is actually increases serotonin in the gut, which induces hibernation in the animals. So it's kind of fascinating because we see the same thing as in human, where if anything irritates digestion, it will turn a person away from their senses and actually cause what would be called learned helplessness, where a person can't really take action on what's going on in their life. And yeah, it's to me a crazy thing, because there's so much promoted about raising serotonin, and it will make you happier, and it really seems like it does nothing but make the issue worse. And then of course there's other stress hormones. I think just like stress in general will generally turn a person away from their true senses, and they'll be focused on fleeting feelings due to the stress. So I think anything that a person can lean into that just gives them a kind of feeling of rising above their situation and looking at it from a bird's eye view. I think fruit, sugar, anything that can lower serotonin, like coffee or raised carrot salad, which is a huge thing. I know a lot more people are learning about
We
that
just
recently.
had a raw carrot.
Yep,
before
the
this,
carrot fibers. Yeah, yeah. I think that's anything to lower serotonin, or really just lower gut irritation, because I do think a lot of perception starts in the gut. I mean,
for sure.
people I think are starting to turn on to the idea of the gut brain connection. But
so people are turning on to that, but what I see still in like many corners of the health space is the sugar argument, right? So kind of like break that down. I know there's some people that lean more like they're eating refined sugars and they don't see a problem. So like what's the main thesis on sugar isn't bad?
Yeah, I think that the issue should be seen as, okay, well, why is sugar an issue in the first place? Of course, that's the big question. And Ray thought that our ability to metabolize sugar was impaired by unsaturated fats, polyunsaturated fats. And it to me makes sense when under stress, fatty acids will rise in the bloodstream, and that will oppose our ability to turn sugar into energy. So then that's when we see high blood sugar, and people can develop insulin resistance because they're not able to use the sugar. Diabetes, it's like, I think that's kind of where things go wrong.
And then sugar becomes the culprit when really it's obviously these seed oils.
It's all about the conversion. So yeah, I think like almost for anything it's about where is the conversion going wrong. People have issues with like even milk and dairy and stuff like that. And I think it's clear now to people that at least raw milk is something that can be beneficial, at least in the alternative health sphere. But
cheese
really
also.
it's just all about our ability to metabolize it. And like I said, I think that the main one is just understanding that polyunsaturated fats oppose the thyroid. And the thyroid is one of the main things that will regulate all of our production of enzymes and different factors required to properly use sugar. The B vitamins, I think, are also another crucial thing
but
to
it's all
metabolize it.
to support thyroid function.
Pretty much, yeah. I think not necessarily thyroid function, but oxidative phosphorylation. And thyroid is the main thing that guides that process. So that's just creating the ATP, CO2, heat, water,
Just focusing on energy flow.
Totally,
yeah. And that when people are like ignoring certain, like when they want to, like I've heard some people say that like focusing on anti-stress is creating this like rigidity of like structure and stress. But I feel like after getting through the barrier to entry of understanding, the things that you're breaking down now, then that kind of flow comes, because you see it from like you said, from a bird's eye view, because you're able to kind of lean into that flow a bit more. And I think a lot of people are just afraid to kind of lean into things that they don't understand, or just they don't feel they have the time for. But that's the exact the sentiment that they need to embrace to like get that freedom and get that energy flow and be able to tap into their divinity more.
Totally. Yeah, like I noticed like I think just being able to listen to the truth of your situation is really at the core of it. I think that the sooner you can accept wherever you are, even if it's a terrible spot, the easier you'll be able to make it out of that. And I do actually think like there's an interesting contrast between the mental paradigms and the physical energy, since I do see the physical state starting the process, but they're absolutely interconnected. And I think that if you can get in the mind space from whatever it takes to kind of cultivate that state of energy to take action, it will be useful. And to me, my big focus was that the way to cultivate that is really through becoming in tune with your intuition. And I think we always have a sense of what's going to lead us forward or deteriorate us in every single situation. And it's a difficult thing to kind of turn on to if you haven't been listening to it your whole life. And really the whole environment opposes intuition. So yeah, it's I think a tough process, but I think the worse things get sometimes, the easier it becomes to kind of listen to that voice. But
yeah, definitely, because the worst thing is apathy, right? Like if you're falling down, at least that creates a launch pad for the way up. And the more you listen to your intuition, the more you'll be able to hear it. Right? The more you lean into that, the more you realize, oh yeah, I should have been listening to this voice and actually taking that step the whole time. And that's where risk comes in. Like when you realize that the only risk is not taking any risk, then you start to realize that you're capable of more than you thought you were. And that's when you're kind of able to conquer fears and you're able to take control of your health and all these other things. And when you talk about, so I know you've mentioned like thyroid T3, right? Which is like thyroid glandular. right? Which
T
is
T3 is the active form of thyroid.
the active
Yeah.
form of thyroid, but it's desiccated thyroid.
So yeah, there's
Yeah, the
natural
organic
desiccated thyroid, which is T3 and T4, which is the inactive form. And then there's synthetic forms of, you can take just the active thyroid T3, and then also with the T4. But yeah, in the normal form, it'd be T3, T4, and then some other factors like there's T2 and calcitonin, which those are kind of useful. But
Okay.
yeah, so there's
But that kind of runs like parallel with the argument like supports like, right?
totally, yep.
Which is like, I know that some people disagree, but like if you eat heart, it has like CoQ10, which is good for your heart.
Exactly.
So what is it about the thyroid specifically that kind of makes that actually work?
Yeah, well, I think just like if like you go back to when I think maybe like around the 1930s when they first started using like extracted thyroid glandular, they were actually before that eating thyroid gland in the food supply. So like before like different, I forget exactly what regulating agency in the U.S. Before they stepped in, I think it was around the 50s, and they completely removed thyroid from the food supply. But before that, you would get it in like chicken head soup or fish head soup, and just different broths. And we were eating nose to tail. I think a lot of people are kind of familiar with that idea. But yeah, it's like when you take something like that out of the diet, I think that's a big thing. But
Same thing like McDonald's fries used to be tallow fries.
Exactly.
And then,
yeah.
somewhere along the line, things started changing. And,
Yeah.
I guess I don't know if it was on purpose or people just didn't realize the downstream effects that change would have.
Yeah, to me it's always an interesting thing to kind of speculate about of why were these things introduced in the first place. Like I do think that for me, I think seed oils is probably the first one that I noticed, and I think that's of course what Ray focused on. But yeah, it's always the question of whether was there real malice behind this for control, or was this a thing to generate profit? And I think both of them tie
I think it's a bit of both. Yeah, definitely. Like, why do they really put fluoride in the water to protect our teeth? I mean, you know what I mean? Doesn't really make any sense. But another thing that's really interesting that we kind of touched on recently was on like spirit and faith, and how having faith in something higher than yourself is like a direct representation of the pure flow of energy, right? Because we were kind of saying that when the spirit like wants too many answers and wants to understand something that it doesn't understand, that creates some type of resistance in the energy flow. So like how does that correlate to just faith and being able to surrender to something higher than yourself, and how that promotes like the childlike state, this euphoric energy flow of just pure life energy?
Yeah, I actually just saw people know probably Bronze Age pervert from Twitter.
For sure.
I saw a quote of him talking about this exact idea, and I think he said something about divine carelessness, or essentially just leaning into the fate that God has planned for you. And I find it really interesting because when I got into William Blake, who is one of my favorite artists, Ray was really inspired, and we've talked about that. We both like Blake, It was huge for me to see the quote, the fox provides for himself, but God provides for the lion.
Yeah.
And something about that stuck with me right away. And then what I realized over time was that what Blake was really saying was that effort is not admirable in life. Really, the natural order is the thing to really find peace in and lean into. And it's, I think, all about identifying your nature. And it's just a powerful process, because when you know that you're supposed to do something, when you know who you are, even if it's scary to you, it ends up, something just ends up happening, and you become who you are, and it's not really your choice. It's the work of God in my view. So
And even if it doesn't work out, like you learn about yourself in the process, and you pivot, and you're able to trust yourself more, even if it doesn't work out, because you were willing to take that risk and that leap of faith.
Totally.
And the fox, well, what was it again?
The fox provides for himself, but God provides for the lion.
Yeah, so it's kind of like a nod to this like innate energy flow this
Yeah.
innate like order of nature that's always present,
Totally.
that we
Yep.
kind of have to be present with in order to like, live a life that is worth living, right?
I mean, yeah, like I think like stress is like something that takes us away from that, and almost tries to put the responsibility in our own responsibility. That we really don't have any
Yeah.
anything when we're trying to actively cultivate something. And that was an idea that I was kind of wrestling with, because I think that discipline is something that should just happen.
Yeah.
I don't think you should cultivate discipline. And I always focus on like David Goggins is the perfect example.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
always talks about how disciplined he is, how he always runs every day. I don't think he's forcing anything he's doing. I think he's emanating with these higher unconscious energy sources that are feeding to him.
Yeah.
And
Even though he says that there's times he wakes up and he looks at the shoes and he doesn't want to do it, but he knows that he has to, so he does it anyway.
exactly.
There's
Yep.
that like little step that people will say it's discipline, but really, yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, not that there's zero effort, but that it's obviously in the physical running, there's physical effort happening, but you are channeling something bigger than yourself when you decide to do these things.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yep.
so it's not really a object of effort. It's more of just flowing with what has to be.
It's faith. Yeah,
Yeah.
I do think it's faith. Yeah.
Yeah, it's faith manifested like physically,
Totally. Yeah.
which is like staying fit, And what would you say to somebody who just doesn't feel like it takes so much effort and discipline to show up to be healthier, show up to be physically fit in those ways?
I think there's only two things that can be the case. Either you're doing the wrong thing, or you're doing the right thing and you just don't have enough energy. And it was huge for me to kind of understand that and intuit at that, because I was just told so many times that, oh, maybe this isn't the right thing for you when it comes to like posting content or stuff like that. Just because I struggled trying to post for probably, I think, like close to 3 years now. I was doing content a while back. People have, I think some people have like found videos that I made. I was making clothing. That was one of my main things, but I was still kind of interested in just like health and philosophy and stuff like that. But it took me so long because I'd never really had a perception of my metabolic issues. Really, that everything that I did in the past felt like it took so much effort, even though it's something that I knew I wanted to do. And it was so difficult for me to deal with that until I found Ray's work. And it just made me realize that really when my thyroid is functioning well, the first time I started taking thyroid hormone, I took it as a supplement. It was I didn't even realize that I didn't need to take effort in life. Like the work did not feel like it really took anything. And there's really not words for it, but
it's interesting how the solution for you became the work.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, you do have to double down on this belief that the energy is the answer, and it can get very neurotic, I think. But only when you lean in far enough does it liberate you. And even I myself battle with that constantly, of understanding that really, like, hypothyroidism is an issue, but like hypothyroidism is not an excuse. So I think it's health issues are really just something to run past.
I think you heard Brute talk about this recently on Spaces. Was that Brute the Force? Was that like a lot of people nowadays will use health problems as a cop out, right? Like, they need this excuse to justify their inaction. So there's a fine line there, right, between realizing that you're not supporting the energy flow needed to get what you need done, and when it's just an excuse. And I think the main distinguishing factor there is if you're engaging in activities that are like halting that forward movement that you want for something to get done. If you shouldn't be smoking weed because every time you smoke weed, you don't get anything done, then that should be what you address first before saying not just hypothyroidism, but like anything, like people who are constantly sick or constantly have an injury, things like that they're constantly using to prop up this other awful habit that they have.
Yeah.
Which I think is huge. Like, address those obvious limiting factors first, and then if you have an even playing field and you still notice something, then you can kind of dive into the health stuff a bit.
Totally. I mean, I think like I almost think that it's to a point, you can be doing almost as much as possible for health, where it's something that I think that it becomes an act of just doing what you feel like you want to do, and not really worrying about removing things. I think the removal is absolutely vital, but to me, it's about saying yes to things that you want to say yes to. And I think that's a huge thing with like Nietzsche's philosophy. But yeah, like Danny Roddy, who I mentioned earlier, who posts a lot about Ray, he had a good tweet that he put out. He said, I think I need to get healthy to do X, Y, Z is almost always the wrong frame. Really, you usually benefit from doing X, Y, Z thing. And I thought it was powerful.
Which also brings up another thing that I've been really leaning into the concept recently, is this concept of having a reserve of energy, right? So that you can interface with the world. But if you're just focusing on health so much that you're not using it, like, you know, like a resiliency test on your health, right? Like you build your health up so that you can go attack your mission, attack your goals, attack what's next with what your intuition is telling you to do. But if you're just focusing on stacking health with nothing else, then you're just like a healthy pleb, right? Like you're just a healthy drone cog in the system. But if you're using that to fuel like something that you're really passionate about, or something that you know you want to lean into, then that's where the health actually is serving you.
Absolutely. Right. Dude, the first time I talked to Brute, I just hopped up on a space, and then we ended up talking for a while, and we were talking about this exact thing of like the Muscle Beach bodybuilders. They're kind of just loitering in life, not really getting anything done. And it's something that Brute kind of brought to my mind, of just the catabolic state being really that expenditure is where you generate things in life, and then you refuel after.
That's something I've said. Go.
It's never you heal first. You always need to heal after, but it's almost funny, because what we're talking about is, I think, the thing of you get energy by expending energy. Your energy is limited by how much you consume, or how much you work on, how much you take on, and that's what Brute's trying cyclical. To, I think, like, promote.
So that's always something I've said, is like transcending the NPC gym bro mindset. Not like, you know, the pre-workout, the Fruity Pebbles whey protein powder and chicken and rice and broccoli. Those types of things on the structural level, right, is what we have to get past. But I think this is even deeper on like a spiritual level, where you're not simply focusing on, you know, I go to Muscle Beach all the time, but I'm also on a mission, right? I'm also like fueling that for something else. I'm not just hyper focusing on the aesthetics or on this body, this like veneer of health and masculinity and a physique that's like disguising the lack of pursuit for anything higher.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think blending those and really transcending the gym bro is like what the next level is.
I totally agree. Like I genuinely think that the whole sun and steel philosophy has to be one of the most detrimental things for a young guy. And the reason I say that is because it puts the act of sharpening yourself above your mission. Like, again, this is what Brute said. It's like, you're not the mission. Your mission is the mission, and you sacrifice yourself for that. So that that's the whole thing of cultivating energy and vitality it's really for this greater vision or this greater purpose. And when you don't have that, you become that. And it's like, to me, I think the degeneration of man is when he's picking at himself and looking in the mirror and, you know, propping himself up like he's the prize. It's really, I don't think ever supposed to be like that.
It should come by proxy, right?
Exactly.
Like just literally on the path. It happens because that is who you are. You engage in these activities, but they don't define you, because your mission defines you, and that's never ending, right? Because every day there's something else. There's always a step to be taken.
Totally, yeah. And I think like an idea that I really liked is that, like, I think I had a tweet. I was like, because Brute, I'm guessing probably people who like follow you probably are familiar with him already, but like when
if not, definitely check him out.
Yeah, like when I first found him, I liked seeing the idea, because I thought he was just a money Twitter guy. Like, I've talked about this before, like how we kind of got in contact and stuff like that. But I thought he was just a money Twitter guy. He had a video talking about looks maxing. He was kind of ragging on looks maxing, saying these guys legitimately think that they're gonna make themselves handsome and the world's gonna court them. Like, and I just kind of wrote it off. Then I started seeing more tweets that he had, that were really in line with the way that I thought about things. And I think that's when he started seeing my tweets. Then we got on Spaces. Then we connected after that. And just through that process of just becoming really familiar with his work and his tweets and his Spaces and everything, I saw his idea of the mission just being so transcendent for any focus. It really, like, the mission is complete nourishment. Like, I had that's the tweet that I'm saying, like,
Should maybe bring that up.
oh yeah. I think like it feeds you, like, literally, meaning it will bring you towards food, it will bring you towards relationships, love, money. It brings you all of these things.
Yeah.
Because I think when you're flowing with energy, you become a fruit. Things fruit from you, the work that you do.
Yeah.
I think it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because I think it, as time progresses, there's going to be new philosophies, new belief systems that prop up in society, right? And I've heard him say things about the East, how, if you're born in the game of capitalism and you embrace Eastern philosophy and you just like meditating in the forest all day, it's kind of just to admit that you've lost the game, right? Like, you want to be a success, right? And I feel like this same notion that you are not the mission, you are the mission, and the ego becomes elevated, and the physique and the health becomes elevated by proxy, is kind of just this blend of like separating from self and aligning with something higher, but also like in conjunction, yourself is going to be elevated as well.
Exactly.
Which is really interesting.
It's so crazy to me because I think like what you're describing right now, the idea of elevating your ego above your mission, I think is the impairment of energy flow. Really, like, you can see, I think, the generation of money without reinvesting into something or gaining energy to preserve, trying to hold on to things. Mm-hmm. It is this physical block in the energy flow, and I think it kind of goes with digestion, it goes with blood clots, it goes with plaque in the arteries.
Yeah,
all
it's
of
just
these
like
physical things.
Expanded. It's like a minutia version of it, which is like,
totally.
Yeah, and that also goes in the face of like pinching pennies, right? Like this also kind of is parallel with the concept of abundance. Like, things just flow to you effortlessly, right? Money and all these resources. Not that it doesn't take any effort, and obviously there's more to just the concept of thinking, and it will happen. You have to put thoughts to action and all that. But it definitely, you can see it expanded everywhere. Like, it's a broad extrapolation. Like, if you are pinching pennies, you are inherently saying that money is limited, so you don't access the limitless money. So you're always like capping yourself with these little safety habits that you put in place, and that can literally be extrapolated back to PUFAs and blood clots, like you're saying.
Totally. Yep.
And speaking of blood clots, aspirin.
Yeah.
What's up with aspirin?
Aspirin is a
aspirin pilled?
Yeah, it's becoming, I think, more known to people that aspirin can be a useful thing. I think really when people see aspirin, they think, well, I mean, you just take it for cold and flu, right? Like, why would you take aspirin anything else? Like, but the focus that Ray had was that aspirin is unlike any other aspirin is a NSAID, they call it, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. And like Tylenol, ibuprofen, the other ones, they're actually like toxic to the liver.
Yeah.
But something unique about aspirin is that it might actually have liver protective effects and brain protective effects. And I think the whole focus is that aspirin was originally derived from white willow bark. Yeah. And that can be traced all the way back to, I think, the Egyptians, and they used it as like an anti-inflammatory and to combat pain and flu and sickness.
So would people be better off taking it in that form, or what happens when because obviously aspirin has this overtone within the space of like the pharmaceutical industry, right? So like, what is it that happens from white willow bark to aspirin pill?
Yeah,
what's that process?
So white willow bark is salicylic acid, and then aspirin is acetylsalicylic acid, which makes it a little bit more potent for its anti-inflammatory quality.
Okay.
But really the interesting thing that I saw was that salicylic acid is a plant hormone. So plants produce this as a protection against stress and a protection against any irritants or things in the environment. And
Should hit up Paul Saladino about that.
yeah, no, well, it's interesting because like much of the roles that salicylic acid plays in plants are very similar to progesterone in humans, which is a hormone that Ray focused on, for supporting the nervous system, anti-inflammatory, lowers estrogen, which are pretty similar to the effects of aspirin. So I think that it's typically like known in the Eastern philosophy, like traditional Chinese medicine, that they're useful herbs. And I think that's something that's kind of missing between the bioenergetic sphere, and I think some people in the alt health sphere are into using herbs, but to me it's kind of crazy that it hasn't become more popular, at least like with aspirin in particular, because the other thing with aspirin is that it opposes the effects of polyunsaturated fats. So it's a COX inhibitor. So COX is the enzyme that turns PUFA into the inflammatory compounds called the prostaglandins and the leukotrienes. So those are really one of the main issues. So aspirin opposes that. Aspirin lowers cortisol. So that's another huge thing. I think it deactivates the enzyme that synthesizes cortisol. It also lowers estrogen, which estrogen is something that typically people see as bad for males, but it's also bad for females. It's not the female hormone.
Excessive estrogen is just not it.
Yeah, well, in like I said, the bioenergetic view, really, progesterone can be seen as the female hormone, and estrogen can be seen as this like stress hormone that rises under stress. But the focus, I think, with that is that estrogen 100% has roles, but it's more so guided by progesterone, because progesterone is this like structuring hormone, and you could see that with the thyroid and the kind of oxidative hormones. There's, I think, kind of a contrast between the stress metabolism and the oxidative metabolism. Like I made a graph one time just putting out like dopamine versus serotonin and like GABA versus glutamate. Like there's tons of contrast, like back and forth contrast like that. And so one of the things is that it lowers stress in a very powerful way. And I think like taking it like aspirin like a few times a week can be great. It also just has a great effect in supporting oxidative metabolism, promoting thyroid function. So I think it's something that people could experiment with.
Cool.
But yeah, it's interesting to get into, because I think people are kind of opposed to the idea that it's like a pharmaceutical or a synthetic substance. But Ray had a interesting perspective on this that kind of formed how I see it. And I think our environment is so bad that it's really warranted to take these modern measures. Like really, I think people have said this before. It's like modern problems require modern solutions. So that's, I think, one of those.
That's kind of what I was gonna touch on, or the question you kind of just answered it was like, are there any innate mechanisms within the body, pre-modern stressors that work to combat all of those things naturally, and would taking aspirin often kind of diminish the innate mechanism?
That's interesting you say that. Yeah, I think like when the body is depleted of PUFA, and so I think like traditional diets were essentially just if you're consuming probably lots of meat, organs, root vegetables, fruit when available, honey when available, dairy products. I think for the most part that's and of course like people would eat vegetables and grains and whatnot, but there's generally pretty low content of polyunsaturated fat, and you're mainly consuming saturated fat. So under stress, when, like I said, one of the main responses in stress is liberating fatty acids into the bloodstream. So when your tissues are comprised of primarily saturated fat, there's no stress response like there is with PUFA, because the seed oils, I think people know, they're easily oxidized, and that's kind of what causes these issues. Saturated fat is extremely stable and actually might have anti-stress effects for, not really causing any issues metabolizing glucose. So yeah, I think that's kind of the interesting thing. But if you're kind of factoring in like the use of aspirin or whatnot, I think that any sort of thing that can increase our metabolism and like consistently oppose stress is something that we should lean into. And it's, I think, a process about following intuition. But ultimately, I see things like coffee, thyroid hormone, like some substances like methylene blue, cyproheptadine, which are, like pharmaceutical, essentially synthetic substances. I think in the right context, they can be extremely beneficial because they don't really have any pro-stress effects. And I think that's the issue, is when you have a medicine that's focusing on a very limited spectrum of effects. So if it's trying to isolate one enzyme, or trying to focus on one enzyme instead of having these holistic effects in supporting energy metabolism. So that's kind of, I think, the big focus.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that like cane sugar is not unnatural. And to me, I think our ancestors would have been eating as much cane sugar as possible. I could not see anyone from the past avoiding all of these exogenous substances that we have now.
Like honey, like orange juice, like these
Well,
types of things.
that's that.
But then cane sugar is a natural thing, so they would have been utilizing that as well.
Totally. Well, yeah, it's like, I mean, obviously people, if they had fruit available, I think they would have eaten it. So yeah, I think it's just a interesting thing, because I've just been really anti the ancestral or primal lifestyle that we need to return to this like kind of primitive life form. I really do see your level of function and your consciousness and the things you're able to create in the real world. I see that trumping living a healthy life, because it's never to me about health. It's more so about increasing this flow of cosmic energy, really. I think.
And I think, I can't agree with that, but like everything, I think a blend of both is probably best going forward, just because the pendulum always swings so forward, right? Like AI is literally on the rise right now, and there's people trying to return to tradition. So it's just like a hyper response to cultural stressors that is basically inevitable. But I believe, like, as it balances out, these types of things will become more prominent, where we focus on little subsects of vitality and health, right? But obviously, like, one of the things of the return to tradition, right, is like grounding, sunlight, no sunblock. Like these types of things for the most part are going to be beneficial to the overall health. But yeah, I agree that the foundation of it is we're never going to return. So we need to kind of move forward with a new slate, with a new like mechanism that we work off of.
Yeah, it's like I think the goal is always just like leaning into like kind of Blake's idea that just energy is everything, and like I think it was like energy is eternal delight was what he said exactly. But it's something that I think when someone becomes more familiar with Ray's work, I actually just put a video out talking about this from a quote that Ray had, kind of an excerpt from Generative Energy. We were talking about this earlier. Ray was talking about the euphoric state, and I think that his focus was, if you're not in the euphoric state, you're essentially degenerating structurally. And I think that's really a good sign of where your life is at. If it feels stimulating, if you're drawn forward by what you're doing, or if it feels like a act of cultivating discipline every time, to me, I think that's a sign of sickness.
It's straight resistance,
Exactly.
And I think everyone can resonate with that, which I think it's so interesting to tie that in with health, because there's so like organically separated from the conversation of health for some reason. Like no one's like, you need to be in a euphoric childlike state, and then also saying, so in order to do that, this is how you have to eat, what you have to do, and kind of tying that into intuition, faith, like life and energy. I think it sounds like foolproof, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're never gonna have the answers, but what we're always, I think, gonna have is or something that we can, I think, find helpful is knowing what questions to ask. And I think Ray's idea of perceive, think, act was a huge thing for me, I think, in focusing on this idea of understanding how to work with any environment that you're in. Because like again, that's my idea of just intuition, where when the path isn't clear, you have what is within you to find that way forward. And it's, I think, just all about listening to your senses truly, like really having a full awareness of what's going on. But again, it does take a while. I think it's like something that needs to be sparked, almost like a flame on a fire. Like you really need something to light that. But
and I think a lot of that could go back to that childlike state, right? Like before you were influenced by the world around you, by people who gave you these limiting beliefs about what you were capable of. What was it that you were interested in? That might not lead you to salvation in the long run, but at least start there. Like when you were a kid, what was it? Like, did you want to be, like, I personally just realized this now, but I wanted to be a veterinarian. I don't want to be that now, but I'm sure if I was lost and I was like, oh, let me just maybe be around some animals, right? That might be anabolic in a way. But like, what was it that sparked that interest and that fire within you as a child, and lean into that a bit more now? And that'll probably just, it might open you up to a lot of new possibilities.
Dude, to me that's been so powerful,
Yeah.
that exact idea you're describing, because yeah, I feel like what I'm working on now is really what I was trying to reach towards as a child. I was just me particular, I was always interested in like Indiana Jones and like James Bond, and like kind of just the act of like putting together nature and trying to find answers
Yeah.
to problems and energy. And when I look back at when I was young, all of that is what I'm channeling now. And to me, there's so many answers in very early youth. And when people can look back at that and intuit what their spirit was, without having these imposed forces like we're talking about, it's just so powerful, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And just like as I'm looking out at like the buildings and all that, like I was thinking of like architecture and how people say that aesthetics are huge, right? Like how the modern world is like like removing the free flow of aesthetics and like buildings and things like that. Have you seen that? Yeah, right.
So,
Yeah, like how everything is not as beautiful as it once was when it comes to structures and churches or buildings overall. It's like this postmodernism depressing thing to look at, right? So how do you kind of tie in a aesthetics to generative energy and that forward flow of energy?
yeah, it's an interesting thing for me, because I was always like into aesthetics. I know I could
Yeah,
tell you are too.
definitely.
Yeah,
And
and
I
it's
think it just visually, it's like it's inspiring, and that feeling of inspiration is kind of that forward flow of energy. So what, like, I feel like it really speaks to the what the society is willing to tolerate when the architecture is like dimmed down.
Yeah, well, it's I think an expression of what's going on in the internal state, but not completely. So I think that when someone's working from their spirit, really everything they do, I think, becomes beautiful, even if it is like I think a person could be ugly and essentially have some form of energy that outruns whatever deficiency they have visually or anything that there is in their environment.
Sure.
So I do think that my focus was just when energy is the priority, things become beautiful. Health and beauty, I think, are no different. And I think there's a reason that like cleanliness is next to godliness or whatnot. But yeah, I've always been inspired by like just visuals. But I think that for someone who sees a vision like that, almost like I found something profound where when I stopped caring about aesthetics and the way that like my work or videos and stuff that I make, because for a while I felt like I was just a very perfectionist person, and it always got in the way. I could always only get halfway through things. I could just get to the start of things. I could plan something out, never fully actualize it, and it was always that, oh, it's not perfect, it's not this, that. What I realized is that by just going through just whatever deficiency of quality that I had to go through, just promote the flow. Eventually, the quality will upregulate, or essentially, like, I think a thing that people who go through health issues tend to deal with. I'm kind of going all over the place, but there's I think a thing with people who get into bioenergetics where they're supporting their metabolism and they end up putting on a lot of weight, but they've failed to remember that how bad of the issues that they were dealing with, just like stressing their bodies for years. So I think some people will see that when they start nourishing themselves, they can actually decline in appearance or stuff like that, talking about the physical state. But I think eventually all things like that upregulate it. I notice people is through sticking to energy flow, and I think that can just tie into anything. Like I said, with like the work, with the art, and health itself. I think when you focus on energy flow, everything will regulate eventually, and that's what I found in my case. So I think it's a powerful idea to stick to. But
it also speaks to like maybe not everyone is meant to like be Jack and have a six pack. Right?
Exactly.
Like
yeah.
if they're focusing on something higher than themselves, they might be healthier and live longer than the guy who's, like we said, just like sun and steel max.
Exactly. It's all about putting it on the line and just actually having the faith to express what is within you, and that's promoting the flow of energy.
Yeah,
so.
definitely. I still think they should probably go to the gym though.
Yeah. I think so
But
too.
but yeah, when you're talking about aesthetics, that could speak to like you said, it's on the internal. But if everybody at the top who controls these big choices are stuffing PUFAs and vaccines into their body, like they're in a stressful state and they're the ones running the show, so the downstream effects are just like a dimmer light in the, not only the aesthetics, but I feel like that's representative of the human spirit overall, right?
Totally. I mean, I had a video where I was kind of talking about this, where I really think that anything that promotes the flow of energy can be considered good. Anything that impairs it, I think, can essentially be considered an evil,
Yeah.
or really the evil is working through that. And it's a powerful idea, I think, tying in with the bioenergetic view and faith in divinity, because I do see absolute connections between them. But I do also think that potentially health could exist with like evil acts. But to me, that because I've had discussions with people about this, people have kind of like gone against people in the bioenergetic sphere about believing that health or energy is actually everything, that there needs to be an aspect of faith and divinity. And I do think they're interconnected, because I think a healthy organism is incapable of doing anything evil. I think they'll be tempted by evil, but really they have the energetic resources to have faith in something that's above them, to have faith in God, is what I see.
Yeah,
But
because evil is degradation,
yeah,
and good is like that forward flow.
evil is thinking that you have control, I think, and exactly that is piling up resources for yourself or not expending things. And it can be within the spirit, or it can be physical, and it can be transmitted through generations before you. And yeah, I think that's why ensuring that you have an abundant environment and a stimulating work that really just your life is focused on correcting these deficiencies that came before you. And Ray focused on this idea of raising carbon dioxide. I think we might have talked about this, where I was like telling you about the B vitamins, where there's two things that raise methylation, which is like a way that DNA works, but actually like hormonal imprinting. So like essentially people might be familiar with epigenetics, where you can accumulate the stresses that your generations prior to you experienced, and by causing methylation to demethylization, which is what happens when you increase metabolism and raise carbon dioxide, that can correct a large chain of events for your entire future, like as in all the generations,
Like
past you.
generations,
Yeah, it's I think Georgie Dinkov was talking about this, where it's like I think you're affected like I forget exactly, there's percentages that he was talking about for how each generation affects you. And
this is like the chatter way of addressing generational trauma.
yeah, it's wild to me. Yeah, because I
Yeah,
think
it's
so
real.
many of these metabolic issues, which I see all health issues as a metabolic issue, I think so many of them have to be seen of like what happened before you. Like you're dealing with an issue that somebody like 4 generations before you probably had some trouble with, or something, or there was something that attacked them, or they had some sort of indelible. I think Hans Selye might have said that every stress leaves an indelible scar, or something along those lines. But yeah, I think it's just powerful understanding that it's just so much deeper than just your life.
Yeah.
But you can correct a lot past that for the next
Yeah,
future.
that's very powerful. Yeah, because it's basically like, I've heard that genetics are just a loaded gun, but you decide how to pull the trigger, right?
Exactly.
Which is that concept that your genetics are somewhat like, you can't, I'm not going to grow a foot tomorrow, but there's certain things on the epi level that you can 100% influence and change, which is going to be passed on and passed on and passed on.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's very powerful stuff.
Yeah, it's like I think one thing that Ray focused on was Lamarck was a person who looked at evolution, and then there was of course Darwin, who talked about evolution, and Darwin saw essentially these random mutations in genes throughout your like bloodline, and Lamarck saw really changes happening in your lifetime. Really, the changes are pretty instant, and I think it's much more in line with this idea of like a coherent life, where nothing is random. And that's to me what the bioenergetic view affirms, is that everything has an abundance to it, and really the only scarcity is artificial.
Yeah, and
so
that kind of really speaks to, you know, the way that we define life, the way that we define this consciousness is like based on our physical form. But if you think about it, like the fact that it's going to be passed on, that's like life is abundant, and I'm living the same life technically through those epigenetics that my ancestors
it's a
did.
continuation.
Yeah, you are constantly rewriting the history, and it's all tied. So that kind of it should put you in the perspective to be making choices not just for the day to day, kind of zooming out more, and how is this going to affect like my bloodline.
Yeah.
And that makes life way more, not serious, but like you realize the gravity that you have with every day, and the choices that you make within those days.
Totally. Yeah, and ironically, I think that framework tends to put you more in the present moment. Like I do think it is kind of tied in with the idea of memento mori. I know you have that tattoo. But just understanding that you're impermanent, and leaning into it, really.
Definitely.
Yeah,
for sure, man. Well, man, yeah, I think it's a good place to tie it up.
Yeah, it's been great. Yeah,
for sure, brother. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate it, man.
This Miami afternoon.
Yes. We'll maybe do something more in the future.
Definitely. We'll have a part 2.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right,
yeah,
brother.
appreciate it, man.
Likewise.